good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk about backup recovery in the context of clouds. So at the outset, I would like to say that backup and recovery it's not a new topic per se, right? It's been an age-old practice. So having said that, so most of the stuff that you probably see, you would have, you already know about it, right? And I'm sure there's some of them which is covered in the morning session by Arun, right? So I'll try and make it interesting, probably get a different context to it, right? So I just wanted to show a brief agenda what we'll look at. So we're just going to look at what are the drivers for change, and a little bit about what cloud backup is. Although most of you know what cloud backup is, how it probably works, and data protection in the context of cloud. And we look at the consideration and challenges for the implementation, right? So before I proceed, I just wanted to start off with a show of hands. So how many of us know that, or I would say, how many of us do cloud backup? Okay, quite a few. Okay, and how many of us know that our data is being backed up on a cloud? Okay, still few hands. Okay, not a problem, right? So that was just to, so that I can build a perspective according to that. Okay, so I'm sure you've seen this slide a lot of times, right? In the past 1.5, 2 years, this slide has been there in almost all the conferences which involves big data, the cloud, and so I would just like to spend a few seconds here. So this is obviously a projection which is forecasted. And there's a sharp increase, as you can see, the graph. And I'm sorry, there's a little bit of the numbers are cut. So somewhere around 40 zettabytes is what is being projected at the by 2020, right? So that's how our data is growing, right? So we all know the fact, right? Also, if you look back at probably around 9 to 10 years from now, right? So we started talking about data in terms of GB, right? And then so there are two perspectives to it. So when I say we started, so as a user, right? No, I'd be very thrilled, if I had a 1 GB pen drive. Now I'll boast about it, right? And slowly over the years, if you look at the size of the balloon, it's kind of grown, and by the next few years, we'll be talking about a zettabyte, right? Now I don't know how many zeros a zettabyte have, right? But it's quite a lot, right? So that's the kind of data that we are looking at going forward, right? And okay, let's probably look at so where is this data coming from, right? So that's how our data is classified or categorized, I would say. So if you look at, there are two parts to it. The blue one, which shows a steady or a near linear growth of data, which is the structured data, right? So structured data means that, typically the data that we tend to store in our relational databases, right? So where we do a search and then the retrieval time is faster, right? The bigger chunk is the unstructured data, right? Now, unstructured data, as opposed to structured data, you cannot fit into a relational database for the very simple reason that they don't have structure, right? So, so there are two problems with unstructured data. One is the amount of unstructured data that is getting generated is huge. Second, how do I store it? Third, if I store it, how do I retrieve it? And there's a bigger, I would say, opportunity behind the unstructured data is the analysis of unstructured data, so which is a totally different paradigm altogether, right? So to give a sense of the unstructured data, let's say, so we are all here today in this conference, and so we have a Twitter handle where you can post what's happening, right? and assume there are around 200 of us over here, and let's say a tweet size would be 100 KB, right? And each one of us is tweeting, let's say 200 into 100 KB, and I wouldn't think we will stop with one tweet. Let's say even if you go around an average of 10 tweets, right? So within an hour or within probably a couple of hours, we have already generated that much of amount of data, right? So this is just one piece of it. Now, if you look at the practical solutions, if you look at an aircraft, right, when you talk about the super jumbos and the 787s, I'm told that I read somewhere that a 787 generates about half a terabyte of data per journey, right? So it has hundreds of sensors, and each sensor sending information to a remote server every second about the different parameters, right? So fathom that amount of data and fathom the amount of storage that is required by a company which needs to store the data, right? So that's the kind of data we're talking. So we just listed down a few examples of the unstructured data, which probably we would be closely related on a day-to-day basis, right? So PDFs, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so at the beginning I asked a question, right? How many of us do cloud backup, right? And I did see a few of the hands go up, right? But in essence, I want to touch upon another concept which is closely related to cloud backup, right? And I thought it would be appropriate at this point to talk about it, right? Which is our cloud storage, right? How many of us know about cloud storage? Oh yeah, right? So what is cloud storage? So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how cloud storage is different from cloud backup, right? Now, if you look at cloud storage, now it is intended as an extra storage medium, which means what? It's like, okay, so before coming to this presentation, so I had the presentation stored on my laptop, and so I just wanted to be safe in case anything happens to my laptop. I should be able to retrieve it from another place. So I kind of used a cloud storage facility to store my presentation, right? So as I say, it's easier to access, okay, and edit from different devices. So typically, if I needed to edit my presentation and put it again, so I just download it, edit it, put it back. So it's as easy as that, as long as I have an internet connection running along with me, right? Share files with others is probably one of the most powerful and most used feature of the cloud storage, right? So you have a file and you want to share it across, you just get a shareable link and then share it through WhatsApp, through email, through a number of medium. So files uploaded to cloud service are usually selected specifically by the user and make a subset of the total collection. So right now, this is a specific reason why I put this is because what you upload to cloud storage is up to you, right? Do you want to put up your payslip on the cloud storage? Maybe not. Do you want to put up a couple of pictures? Maybe yes, and you want to share it? Yeah, right? So it's at discretion of the user that the files are uploaded. And usually they are on a one-off basis to a cloud and downloaded as needed, right? So it's more of a personal use where you would use a cloud storage. And some of them have limits on the size of the individual, so you can't probably upload more than 4 GB or 5 GB, right? Okay, so data security may not be as stringent as for the backup provider because it's not one of the, it's not a governed SLA. So, and on the right hand side is some of the examples of a cloud storage, right? So I'm sure most of us would be using either one of them, Google Drive or Dropbox or any one of them, right? So that's what I wanted to just put in front of you. What is the difference between a cloud storage and a cloud backup? So let's look at what cloud backup is. So essentially, a cloud backup is it's also called as an online backup, right? Which means what? Which means when I'm doing a backup, I need to be connected via the internet. right? So it's an online backup. So you'll find a lot of mention saying, I'm doing a cloud backup or I'm doing an online backup. So both mean the same. Now, typically it involves sending a copy of the data over a proprietary or public network to an off-site server, right? So before I go into any for talking about this further, so let me just go back to how traditional backups work, right? So in traditional backup, there was always a specified set of files. We used to backup. It used to be our it could be our emails, it could be some sensitive information, important information which you wanted to have another copy in case of any failure occurred, right? And most of it were stored within the company itself, right? And they were not kind of outside. So the only place where they would used to go outside is once you have it stored on the tapes. The tapes would be transported physically to another site of the same organization, right? Or into a tape, storing center, right? So that was how the traditional backup used to work. And when you wanted to retrieve something, right, it always used to be a pain because you either have it, if it is a recent copy, you have it locally. But if it is not a recent one, it's kind of a little bit outdated, and you want to do some analysis, or you wanted to fetch some older data, then you had to transfer the tapes back, put it on the jukebox, autoloader, whatever it was, and then do a retrieval. So retrieval from tape used to be a slower process because of the mechanism involved, right? Which is when then we came to disk to disk, and then we said, okay, disk to disk, fine, disk to disk is fine, but then I don't want to use my disk space when I'm not going to use the data frequently to access it. So then we said, okay, disk to disk to tape. So we had D to D to T, right? So a lot of things. So in the context of the cloud, what is the difference is that whether I need to have it on a tape or I need to have it on another disk, I don't take the decision, right? So all I am worried about is, here's my data, and I give it to someone, you take care of my data, and when I ask for it, you give me the data, right? And typically it's designed to store a large amount of data. So when you mean a backup is usually huge, right? Okay, cloud backup are not intended to be accessed regularly because it is a mechanism where you recover from a disaster. So you don't wish for a disaster, right? So they're not accessed regularly. And in a cloud backup, cloud environment is an easy way to restore all your files in the event of data loss or corruption. So you don't have the logistics of transporting your tapes from another location to your current location, putting it on a data loader, and launching the application and retrieving it. So that's probably an overall picture of what actually cloud backup would entail, right? So just moving a little further. So just look at how cloud backup actually looks like. How can we envisage? So let me tell you, this is probably a very simple representation. In actual, the implementation could be more complex, right? But what I'm trying to showcase here is how an overall setup would look like, right? Now, typically an on-prem, when you say on-prem, so I have my servers, my primary storage within the company, right? Which is the company takes care of, right? So typically all the VMs or the apps that are hosted would be from the local storage, and a primary backup is taken of the storage on a time-to-time basis, right? And the primary backup repository is the source for the backup that goes onto my cloud, right? Simple? Right. Now, that's the concept. Now, what happens when my so you see a small bridge over there, right? Now you might be wondering what that is. So that is nothing but the cloud gateway. So what is the purpose of a cloud gateway? So initially when the cloud backup concept was started, right? So the first thing was, okay, but typically in large enterprises you have a SAN environment where there's a lot of your storage boxes which have data, and you need to take a backup of them and then move it across, right? Now, so you probably be using an FCAL or an iSCSI or one of the protocols which are popularly known. Now, when it comes to the cloud, the cloud the provider, they could support FC, they may not support FC, right? So you needed a person to translate your FC or an iSCSI or an FCOE to a language that would be understood by the cloud person or the cloud repository, right? Which is what the initial gateway was supposed to do. So it would act as a bridge between your on-prem and your cloud, right? Now, when more and more, when cloud providers, started looking at the gateway as more than just a translator, right? So adding more functionality into the gateway, right? So that the gateway, the word gateway became redundant, and they replaced it with controller. So many places you would find the reference as cloud gateway or cloud controller, but essentially what the cloud gateway or cloud controller does is to translate your on-prem data into an understandable format for the cloud, and also offer other services which, as the consumer, you may subscribe to, right? So as I said, this is probably a very simple architecture which I have shown, but you could probably have very complex scenarios when you are going to the cloud. So which would probably lead me to the next thing, what are the benefits? So by now I'm sure all of us know what are the benefits of a cloud, right? So all of us know it provides a lot of things. But in the context of a backup, so when you look at the cloud controller or the cloud gateway, prior to the traditional way of backing up things was not only to back up your data and put it into storage, but also put it in a way that it does not take too much of space. So you had to factor in, the backup software had to factor in the dedupe, the compression, right, so as to minimize the amount of data that is actually stored, right? Now imagine if those compression, dedupe, everything is provided by the cloud controller, right? So in essence, you as if you look at the as a application developer or application provider, so that amount of headache for me is gone, right? So I don't have to worry about doing the dedupe or the compression, right? I can subscribe to the dedupe or compression from the gateway, right? So and also we have a lot of the storage vendors who have their own appliances, which yes.
So I have a very basic question. So if we have a disaster and we have taken a cloud backup, now we would restore this backup to a new site which would contain all the storage and the local storage elements. So will we have a downtime during that time?
Yeah, I'll come to that. So my further slides talk about that. So if you can just hold on to your question. Probably you won't ask that question at that time. Yeah. Right. Okay. So those are some of the encryption and the data deduplication. And also, in the context of cloud, the data centers which host your data are supposed to be certified, right? Which means that as a consumer, how can I be sure that my data is safe with you? How do I know that you're not sharing it with somebody else, right? Or you're not using it for any other purpose? So there is a certification body which has a lot of checklists, and the data centers are supposed to comply to that. All right. Okay, scalability. Now this is a very huge thing in when it comes, especially in the current scenario when we are talking about our data growing in leaps and bounds, right? So traditionally, if you look at it, if I have data growing, I would probably go ahead and buy another storage rack or probably a couple of other things to store my data, right? Now, in the context of a cloud, when my data usage is increasing or my data, the amount of data that I generate is getting higher, I just need to go and tell the cloud provider saying that, hey, I need a few more additional space, right? So you get charged for the additional space that you consume, right? So compared to the cost of buying a whole new storage box to the amount of storage you pay, right? That's a trade-off. And again, it's not a direct trade-off, right? It also depends upon how much of data are you actually going to store, right? So we'll look at that. Okay, improve recovery time. So I know if you had a chance to actually look at some of the cloud backup software. So normally, what the cloud backup software has is it has a good a dashboard where you are given a login credentials. So this is typically given by the cloud provider, right? And so the cloud provider gives you your own credentials of where you can log in. You can see what all backups have been taken, how many times it has been taken, and if you want to restore a particular from a particular backup, you can do it yourself. You don't have to wait for any admin or the cloud provider to come and do it for you, right? So in that ways, there is no physical movement of any tapes. There's no physical retrieving of data from the tapes or from any other medium. So that ways you have a faster recovery time.
Does DD work with the encryption together? I mean, is there a supported service in cloud?
As a service, yes. So most of the cloud providers provide encryption as a service, right? Yes. So if you subscribe for the encryption, then yes.
So dedupe won't work probably on that encrypted data together, because if the data is encrypted.
So from your end, are you doing a dedupe? So dedupe is primarily to make sure that multiple copies of the same things do not get stored, which is right. So it's the whole point of the dedupe. Now, when I am giving my data to the cloud provider, so the cloud provider does not know what data I am giving. He just says, okay, this is your data, okay, and if you want encryption, so I will apply my own encryption and save it, right? So when you are retrieving it, so that it's a decrypted from the cloud provider end and is given to you, right? So whether do I want to dedupe or not dedupe, do you do it dedupe from your end is a consideration that you want to make. Yes. Yes. Ideally, yes, because I think all the most of the software, the backup software these days, they give you an option for doing the dedupe in-house and not depend upon the external factors. Okay, accessibility, anytime access from anywhere, which is as long as you have an internet and you have that login credentials, you're good to go. So it's just an UI and you should be able to retrieve it. Okay, so sorry. There's some of the considerations, right? Now, when you talk about cloud, and the benefits it gives us, so naturally the first thing that comes to mind, let me jump into the bandwagon, right? But then when it comes to the backup, does it really make sense going to the cloud, or am I good being controlling everything on-prem, right? So what are the decisions I need to take, or what are things I need to consider for whether I need to move data to the cloud or not? So one is the choice of the cloud provider itself, right? Now there are a lot of cloud providers available in the market, and one of the major things that you want to look at a cloud provider is in terms of the cost that you will incur in engaging that cloud provider, right? So these days, the cloud provider, they charge you a monthly subscription fee, or they probably charge you for the bandwidth that you're using. They also charge you for the amount of data that you're, the amount of space that you're occupying, right? And also there are the other trade-offs in terms of how secure is my data, how is the provider capable enough to take care of my data securely. So all these consideration goes into the choosing the cloud provider. So it's very important that from a company standpoint to make sure that the person to whom I'm giving my data is well equipped to handle my data, right? Okay, and so if you look at traditional backup, one of the major two things that used to determine the restore. So once there's there's a disaster, I need to recover from the disaster. I need to get my data back, right? Now there are two things that used to determine the recovery. So those are the RTO and RPO requirements, right? So RTO is your RTO is a recovery time objective, and RPO is a recovery point objective, right? So these are the two things that are. So this is not a new concept. This was there right from the traditional backup. So whenever we need to use a DR, we used to take care of what is an RPO and what is an RTO. So let's look at what is an RPO and RTO, right? So we'll just take a look at this diagram. Sorry, the arrows are a little light. So on the right hand side is the recovery time objective, which means what? My recovery time objective can be as close as to the second, or minutes, or hours, days, or weeks. So the further it is, it means that what is the amount of time I am willing to wait for my data to be recovered after a disaster, right? So that gives your recovery time objective, or what is your threshold, or the company's threshold to wait till the data is back after a disaster, right? On the other hand, a recovery point objective. What is recovery point objective? Is the amount of data your organization or you are willing to lose in case of an event. This means what? If I say my RPO is, let's say, in terms of hours, okay. Now there's a disaster which has happened right now, okay. Now when I recover the data, how old will that data be? It will be an hour old, or when the last backup was taken, right? So these are the two considerations that you would anyway do when you are talking about a backup in a on-prem or inside your organization. Now extrapolated to the cloud, right? RPO and RTO have a great deal because there is a dependency on the network speed, the bandwidth, right, which will indicate your RPO and RTO will be usually higher, right? So if your application is let's say if it's a financial application, then obviously you want your RPO, RTO to be a very stringent one, right? Now in that case, does it make sense to move that kind of data to the cloud? Probably not. I would be better off having that data on premise and it is accessible to me when I need it, right? So the tighter the RPO and RTO, the more money you will spend on your infrastructure, right? And this plays a very crucial role in your DR plan, which says that what kind of data you want to put on the cloud, right? Okay, so some more things. So what is it that we need to back up, and what do I need to consider while I need to back up, right? Now the total capacity of the data, because remember you are being charged for the amount of space that you occupy on the cloud provider's storage, right? So you don't want to back up data that you feel is not going to be of importance or is okay, if I lose the data, right? And always, as in the traditional thing, that the time for the first full backup always takes a lot of time, right? So the amount of data that you want to put it onto the cloud, if it's a larger chunk of data, transferring it over the network, so you're going to be using both the bandwidth as well as the space, right, for a full backup, right? So now typically the cloud providers charge in terms of, I think, terabytes these days. So okay, and also yeah, the bandwidth availability talked about. Okay, exit criteria is one of the considerations, because so now I have a cloud provider who is basically taking care of all my data, right? Who is managing the backup of my data. So tomorrow I say that, okay, I don't want to continue with this cloud provider. I probably have, I want to take care of it in my own premises, or I want to move to another cloud provider, right? Now there is an exit fee most of these cloud providers charge, right? And if you're exiting in between, or so there's an amount of fees that is charged. Also, what happens to your data after I've canceled the contract with my cloud provider? How is he going to destroy my data? As in, how is he going to make sure that my data is no longer existing with him and it is disposed of in a proper way, so that nobody else has access to, right? So these are some of the considerations you probably would want to have a conversation or approve with the cloud provider to see how things are taken care of, right? And so SLAs is typically determines what kind of backup. Yes. Okay, that's a good question. So in remote replication, it's always a replication of your data to another storage center of your own company, right? And typically both the centers are managed by your company or by you. The infrastructure is yours.
So will not, using remote application, we can get away with the requirement of doing the cloud backup, or it has a completely different need wherein it would definitely require, some use cases where it would definitely require cloud backup.
Yeah, so typically a cloud backup is, see, look at your, so we are not saying that, I'm going to do away with my primary backup, right? Now that probably will take a lot of time to say that, I'm not going to even have a primary data backup on-prem, right? Now what I am saying is, what kind of data should I have on-prem and what will I replicate, what will I put on the cloud? Okay, now if you remember the diagram, the cloud provider, he can do a replication for his safety. See, essentially what I'm doing in a cloud backup is I'm transferring the risk from me to the cloud provider, right? So if he does a replication, or if he has a second copy of my data, I'm not bothered about that, because I am not putting in money for my infrastructure in that. But in case of a remote replication, right? So there is a site 1 which my company is handling, and there is a remote site 2 which again is taken care by my company. I have manpower taking care of that. So there is a replication from this center to that center, right? So there is no third party involved in that, right?
So basically my reasoning was that the user of, and I have lots of data.
Hmm.
I just want to get away from the recovery time, it takes to restore the cloud backup
Hmm.
to my premises. That
Right.
I want to get away with that.
Right.
And if I think how I can get away with that, then I think, and also have redundancy of data in case of disaster, I can get back my data.
Hmm.
Then I think remote replication comes into my mind immediately.
Sure. So that is why I'm saying just because you have a cloud backup, you don't put your data into cloud backup. It is always driven by what is your consideration, what is your whole objective of putting a data into the cloud.
Right. So the next question comes to my mind is that what are the use cases wherein we would require,
A cloud backup? Okay, typically, okay, if you look at any startup kind of an setup, right? Now, I do not have the manpower to manage my small set of backup, right? So, in which case, it makes sense to have the limited data on-prem and move the other data offshore or onto the cloud and retrieve it as and when needed, right? Of course. And supposing you're okay with it, right? Because the trade-off is between investing in a whole new storage array and maintaining it yourself versus paying for the service where somebody else takes care of maintaining the infrastructure and your backup, right? Now these days there is again the legal complaint that your data should be protected for 7 years. Right. So, which means those kind of data which you probably will not access for the next 5-6 years, you probably don't want to keep it on-prem and you want to move it somewhere else.
So, why would I not try to use archiving solutions for that?
Sure. Yeah, cloud backup gives you archiving also. So, there are different services which you can subscribe to, but then again you are charged for those. Right. So, archiving may not, you probably pay a one-time fee for the entire cycle of archiving. Right. Okay, this is some of the. Yeah, sorry.
This is further to his question, cloud backup, whether I can have a SLA with the same vendor for DR as a service, so my RTO will reduce. So
Yes.
having the complete backup, because I have to have complete power, so that my production will start from that way.
Correct. So again, that is cost based. So the cloud provider, so in fact the role of cloud provider has grown from just providing storage to providing services like your DR, the other service. But only thing is you're chargeable for that. So as long as you're okay with that, sure.
No, because RTO will reduce. If I am having online presence, I cannot afford that much RTO. So immediately.
See, that is again subjective because for RTO for any financial kind of a thing, I would still recommend keeping it on-prem because that's a faster, or a remote replication where you go online within seconds or almost instant. So depend upon what type of data that you are talking about. Okay, so fine. So Paul's shown me the out of time board. So these are some of the cloud backup providers, right? And I think that's probably the last slide of me. Thanks, Paul, for that. A couple of references, right, and yeah. Thank you so much for your time and patience in hearing me out. I hope I made it interesting. Thank you.